Hello geographers, thank you to my gorgeous Class 11D for downloading and listening to this again, and if you're out there and you've randomly picked it up, thank you very much. This is actually part 2 of the Coast Revision podcast. You need to make sure you have listened to part 1 first of all. So as always, there are resources to go with it. My lovely lot, this is on Google Classroom. If you're listening out there, just find the link on Spotify and you can enjoy this PDF, which hopefully will help you with some revision. So this is part 2, and we're now going to focus on Longshore Drift to kick us off. So my class, go back to this Coast Revision booklet I've made, and if you're out there on the great World Wide Web, it is page 6 we got to. Now, Longshore Drift is interesting to a geographer, but it's also actually incredibly powerful. Longshore Drift is actually the movement of sediment along a beach, and we say in a zigzag. We're here, my class, in Happening, Hampshire, and so for us this moves it from the west of England, from Cornwall, along to Devon and Dorset, then along to Hampshire and Sussex, and finally Kent. You may be in a different part of the world or a different part of the UK, but ours is actually going from west to east. So I got really excited the day I went on the trip that it was sunny. Sorry to my class, that was not the day. We were absolutely blown away by the gale force winds. When I went the second day on the trip, I found some red sandstone, which actually comes from Cornwall and Devon. So the geeky geographer loved that I was able to prove that this happens. I'm sorry you couldn't see it. Maybe we need to have a class trip somewhere there. I should perhaps get Megan to organise that again. Big shout out to Megan there. Okay, let's move on then. So we've got this zigzaggy movement, but it can't just move things. The power of erosion, transportation and deposition, the 3 parts of this sequence, is for every landform that's eroded, like Old Harry Rocks, there will be a landform that is created, just like Mudderford Spit. So we say deposition is where material is actually dropped off, and we also have beautiful features like tombolo and beach bars, not the alcoholic kind, the actual physical geography kind. We have them created. So moving on to slide number 7 now, have a little look at some of the landforms actually resulted from erosion. We've got there a type of headland where we actually get stronger, harder rock and more resistant rock. Where you've got soft rock, you're going to get that beautiful bay, that lovely horseshoe shape just at somewhere like Lulworth Cove. Stunning and quite often sandy. They are gorgeous. Where there's harder rock though, you're going to get the headlands like Old Harry Rocks and the Needles left, because the weaker rocks erode at a much faster rate. Of course, the harder rocks take a lot longer to erode through. That hydraulic action and the processes of corrosion and abrasion take longer. So look at phase 2 of that diagram. You've got what we call here this discordant coastline, where we've got the different bands resulting from the soft and the hard layers of rock. As we move down, we don't just have different hard and soft layers of rocks. We've actually got the area of rock along the headland that the waves can actually reach. So here on the next page, we've got the cliffs and the wave-cut platforms. A lot of that actual cliff is undermined from the waves being only able to reach that bottom part of it. A wave can't reach up 50 metres high up a cliff headland. Actually, it can only attack the lower part. So we get this cut out. We actually get this notch being cut out until eventually, because of the effect of gravity, the bit hanging above it will actually fall down. Then we've also got our traditional, our good old-fashioned headland with our cracks, our caves, our arches, our stacks and our stumps. Now I really want you to stop now and hit pause on me and look up some photos of Old Harry Rocks, because I'm sorry I did not put a decent one in. I put instead the 4 stages labelled. Old Harry Rocks is a chalk headland in Dorset. Probably if you're listening to this somewhere else you would have studied it, as it is pretty famous in the land of GCSE geography, but it's stunning. You can see the weaknesses and the crevices in the cracks, you can see caves, and we've actually got 2 separate stacks. We've got a really kind of fat one that's actually left, and we've got a thinner one, and you might not be able to find a photograph, but there is a tiny stump that's only viewable at low tide. But have a look, cement this in your mind. I would also like you to stop now and actually make some erosion notes on actually how this forms. We have the corrosion/abrasion with hydraulic action, weakening those tiny holes and forming cracks. But how does that cave happen? How does an arch get eroded through? What happens to a stack? Take a moment now to actually revise that for me and hit pause on me. Thank you. Okay, thanks for doing that. I've got a feeling that's going to come up in the exam. Also, we've got some landforms resulting from deposition. Now, I spoke about spits and I'm going to come on to those in a sec, but a beach is a depositional feature, and thank goodness for it, as they're quite nice to walk your dog along, quite nice to sit on a sunny day, reading, listening, maybe great thing to do when you guys have got the whole of July off when your exams are finished. You and your besties organised a day trip down to perhaps Bournemouth Beach for my crew. We've also got beautiful sand dunes. This is created actually by particles actually from offshore sandbars, where the sand is blown ashore, it's trapped by vegetation, and these build up over time. We saw these sand dunes actually down at Hengistbury Head. And then we've got the classic, we've got the spits. So spits are actually formed where there is a change in direction of the coastline. I've got to say that. You've got your zigzag movement going on of Longshore Drift, but there's got to be a change in direction. For you lot, my gorgeous class, it's because we've got Christchurch Harbour and we've got the rivers Stour and Avon actually coming out. The mouth is there, they're actually entering and they're actually coming out into the sea. This means instead of actually keeping going with that zigzag pattern, we've got a different current. We've actually got a competing movement. And so actually the sand, the shingle that has been carried by Longshore Drift is deposited. So stop me for another moment and have a little look at Mudderford Spit. Or you could keep me going as I'm going to chat. You could call up a web page on your phones. Have a look though, it's stunning. We've got 400 beautiful beach huts on that property and they sell for a crazy figure. When we went, remember we looked it up and there was one for sale back last summer for £315,000 for a hut. But it's because this area is so beautiful, so special. This spit is a site of special scientific interest, so it's actually protected by law. And it's pretty stunning, but it's causing problems down the coast because of all that sediment being trapped here and building up the beautiful Mudderford Spit. Just around the corner, the other side of the mouth of the river, places like Barton-on-Sea are being starved of sediment. So the issue with this deposition is it actually creates problems further downstream. For areas like Mudderford Spit, which are being protected and built up by coastal deposition, we've got areas like Barton-on-Sea, which are suffering the effects of mass movement and of course are not getting any sand. It's being trapped here at Mudderford Spit. So we move on to one of the last topics just to study, which is coastal management. And there's always a question on this. There are two types. There are hard engineering strategies, which basically involve Bob the Builder, essentially, actually doing something involving diggers, concrete, steelwork, reinforcement. Look at the table that is here onto the page 9. I've got a seawall. Really important at actually reflecting the waves' energy. And they're really advantageous because when you've got sea walls, tourists can walk along them. So they have a benefit of protecting the sea behind and also creating a lovely area for your tourists. But they are expensive. You are looking at about £5,000 for a cubic metre. And they do actually need maintenance. The one down South Sea, we had all that bad weather last week, only last Tuesday, which was Tuesday the 14th of January. We had terrible weather and South Sea's sea wall and its promenade has broken up and the council is now going to have to spend a couple of million repairing it. This is big business. My personal favourite is groins, and of course we've done our fieldwork on groins, so we're not just going to be writing about groins here, we're going to be thinking about our fieldwork for paper 3. Groins are amazing because what they do is they trap sediment, and remember this, they build up a beach. I've said that slow, not to be condescending, and I apologise. I know I can sometimes be like that, but because it's really important you don't forget it. They don't just trap sediment and slow longshore drift. You can never stop it. You can only slow it. They are building up a beach for tourists. So again, this is another advantage to them. But they are starving sediment from getting to places like Barton-on-Sea. So they do actually cause problems further down the coast. And some people say they can be really unattractive and ugly. I'm personally not that fussy. Now, some others which I quite like is the rock armour, or sometimes called the rip wrap. Basically huge boulders, quite often granite, so it does make it expensive. Again, you're talking about £800 to £1,000 for a cubic metre, but the idea is those boulders at the bottom of a cliff will absorb the wave energy, so the cliff is protected behind. However, this is quite expensive, and also the water can actually soak through the little gaps of the boulders. The boulders are jagged and there are gaps, so it can actually undermine and take away and actually kind of take the sand from underneath them. So they end up actually getting closer to the sea and being undermined, and the waves can reach the cliff. So I'm not too sure on rock armour. It's a 50-50. Gabions, I am weird and I love these, and they're not just used for coastal management. Councils are using these like for areas like, either side of a motorway where you've got cliffs and hills and things. They're incredibly cheap. You're looking at about £75 to £100 for a cubic metre, and essentially it's cages of rocks, and you put them up against a cliff, so the waves will hit the cage of rock rather than the cliff. The problem is, lots of people think they're unattractive, and the problem is they only last about 5 years before they need repairing. Luckily, the repairs are a lot cheaper than anything to the rock armour, the groins and the sea wall. But I can say, could you actually change that into a positive? It's creating some jobs. Just a cheeky economic thought there. So I've covered some of the hard. There are a few more, like offshore breakwaters. We did that in class. So my class, go back to your Google Drive folders, find our coastal management table. And we've also got some soft options. So I quite like these. Beach nourishment, actually replenishing the beach, and Bournemouth does it every year. It dredges up some sand and shingle from the sea floor just off the beach, and then it sprays it and it levels all out the coast, and it gives us that beautiful sand. I like that. But this needs constant maintenance. Sadly, Bournemouth have got to do this every year. And even in fact, when we've had particularly bad storms, so in 2014, they actually had to do it a couple of times in a year. So it does get really pricey, but it gives you that beautiful tourist beach. Dune regeneration is amazing as well, and there's a lot of this going on down Hengistbury Head, establishing the sand dunes because they trap and they hold the sand in place. So we've actually building up a beach so the waves can't get to the cliffs, so we do like it. And then there's managed retreat. Probably this is the most popular thing councils do, and they've been doing this at Barton-on-Sea. They've been doing this at good old Black Gang Chine on the Isle of Wight for a long while. Essentially doing really nothing in a way. It's draining off some water from the top to try to stop some of that mass movement acting on the cliff, and it's also, if you can, dragging stuff back. So just before Barton-on-Sea, there's a holiday caravan park, Naish Farm. They've just been dragging back their caravans for years now, years and years. Sometimes we just actually have to give the people the insurance money for their home and let their home tumble into the sea because it's not financially viable. Actually doing things like that is only going to cost maybe £1 million or two. Actually popping in a seawall and all this other management can cost 50-60 million, and it's taxpayers' money. So this is where we talk about the sustainability, and I'm just going to finish my podcast by talking about the to what extent. You're going to have some sort of question about coastal management, and it's always about that. Can you justify, can you assess, to what extent does it work? And we're geographers, so we know that we're going to say to some extent, we're going to make an on the one hand kind of argument, and then we're actually going to understand and say actually to a lesser extent. I appreciate on the other hand it doesn't. We've got to realise there's advantages and disadvantages. So your task to do with this podcast now is to revise Old Harry, is to look over things like spits, and to take this moment finding this table for me, my class, because we also had a column with the sustainability, and actually thinking to what extent do these hard and soft engineering strategies actually work. I want to have a massive shout out for listening. Thank you so much. You did this really well, my class, so take some time to make some more revision notes. And of course, I want to mention the practice questions, particularly for this bit. If you can get down to do a bit of practice on page 12, I've popped in some Ordnance Survey map work. I've also popped in a question 5 on actually spit formation, and you'll notice I've put the mark scheme. So if you're listening out there from not my class, you can mark this yourself. On my class, it gives you an idea, if you don't want to hand it in to me, how well you're doing. There's also the mark scheme on there. So find the resources on our Google Classroom 11D, or have a link that goes with this podcast. Thanks so much for listening. I'll be back next week with Rivers. Bye for now.